All right, guys, Levi Webb here. And on this channel, we are building a real estate portfolio from scratch. And today, I've got a little extra time, so I'm going to make a second video. And this one is not about the real estate journey in particular, but it is a little bit adjacent. Today, we're going to talk about interest rates. And I guess we have to, because that's the talk of the town. As you are probably aware, the Federal Reserve announced, I guess 2 days ago now, that they are lowering the federal funds rate by 0.5%. And the market lost its mind. This was anticipated that the Federal Reserve would cut interest rates either 0.25% or 0.5%. And now I'm going to tell you why this is relevant, and then I'm going to give you my opinion as to what they should really be doing instead. So, when the Federal Reserve in particular is charged with two things, balancing two things. Those two things are full employment and stable prices. Now, they don't really have any very good tools to make these things happen. But the one tool that they do have, it's not a scalpel, it's more of a sledgehammer, and that is interest rates. When they lower interest rates, more money floods into the economy because fiat money is debt. When debt is cheap, more money appears. So when interest rates are lower, money floods into the economy, and this generally will uh, lower unemployment. When they raise interest rates, that money starts to come back out of the economy slowly but surely, and um, and sometimes when that happens, businesses struggle and start to lay people off, so unemployment can rise, and then but the opposite is true of inflation. With low interest rates, much more likelihood of high inflation. Not necessarily high inflation, but much more likelihood of high inflation. And as interest rates go down, the yeah, or as interest rates go up, inflation is likely to come down. Ideally, not into deflation territory, but sometimes this takes a hit on employment. So the Federal Reserve has to try to balance these two things. But here's the thing, is sometimes they kind of forget that that is their charter, is unemployment and stable prices. And sometimes they think that it's their job to stimulate the economy for political reasons, so that whoever is in office at the time looks like they've are a champion of the economy. And sometimes they 2018 is a perfect example of this. Sometimes the Federal Reserve thinks that they are there to juice the stock market and make sure that wealthy investors are not losing money. Um, this is often what they do. This is not their charter. And so here we are, Federal Reserve cut 0.5%. This stock market went wild. This means more money is coming. Fed's printing money. That's going to juice stock prices. Um, that being said, they may have lowered interest rates because there's something going on in the economy that we can't see. Maybe there's some banks in trouble. Maybe this commercial real estate thing is starting to pull on a thread that they fear will unravel the economy. Um, but what I can tell you it isn't right now is unemployment or stable prices. Uh, Unemployment numbers did start to increase, but they're still reasonably low. That it is, we are not at high unemployment. We are still pretty low unemployment. Um, so I fear that this interest rate has come too big and too soon. Um, I don't think inflation is over. I think that they pulled the brake lever and slowed it down, but I don't think it's over. They thought it was over in the 1970s when they boosted interest rates, and then as soon as they cut interest rates again, inflation came back. And so we're trying to do this special maneuver that everybody's talking about of a soft landing, which is this magical sweet spot where we can start to find the sweet spot for interest rates so that the United States economy never has to go into a recession. And I think that that's foolhardy. I think that the United States is overdue for a recession. I think the United States needs to go through a recession. The investors need to remember that investments don't always have to go up, that the Federal Reserve is not there to make sure that your Tesla stock goes to the moon. But also, companies that are just surviving off of debt need to go out of business. Companies that don't provide value and don't make money should not be dragging along. They need to go out of business, and the banks that are lending to them need to remember not to lend to companies that don't make money. So I think the United States needs a recession, and it's hard to, or it's easy to talk about in the large scheme, kind of with an outside view. But recessions are hard. Yes, people lose their jobs, and it makes life hard for individuals, incredibly hard once they've lost their job and their income and money becomes hard to come by again. But that's part of the process. That's part of the process, and just continuing to inflate the balloon in hopes that it will never deflate is not sustainable. So I don't think the Federal Reserve should have lowered interest rates at all. But here's the thing, the Federal Reserve doesn't care what I think. The Federal Reserve doesn't care what you think either. Unless you have $1 billion, you probably don't factor into their rate decision. And now let's talk about the silly way that the Federal Reserve handles this, because I have a big opinion on this. I think that the Federal Reserve goes about this situation all wrong. There's really two things that the Federal Reserve has to move the economy in the way it wants to go. One is interest rates, which we already talked about. And the other thing is talking about interest rates. And it used to be, when the Federal Reserve was first created, for most of its existence, in fact, it was a bureaucratic institution. People didn't know who the Federal Reserve president was. It just kind of hummed along in the background, making things go. It was the plumbing. Nowadays, everybody knows Jerome Powell is the Fed president. You know, Mary Daly and other Fed folks are media figures almost. And that's not the way it should be. The Federal Reserve should not be making press conferences to announce a 1/4 point rate cut. The Federal Reserve should not be doing press conferences on monthly on the state of the economy. And they really shouldn't be doing massive rate hikes or cuts at all. This is all silliness. the rate cut. They should gather as needed, talk about the general direction that they want their interest rates to go in without fanfare, without a press conference, and the interest rates should slowly but surely trickle in that direction. 0.01% per day. Something that doesn't move markets because it's just 0.1%. Maybe some days 0%, maybe some days minus 0.1%, in a way that doesn't move markets at all, in a way that creates no fanfare and doesn't really tip your hand as to whether you're hawkish or dovish at all. And I think this is good for the stability of the markets. Again, the Federal Reserve shouldn't really be worrying about what the markets do outside of how they affect the real economy. The stock market is not the real economy, for those of you that don't know how to differentiate the two. The stock market is not the real economy. Sometimes a high stock market will reflect a stronger economy because people feel wealthy or spend more money. But the stock market is not the real economy. Most of the stock market is owned by a very small percentage of investors, of people in general. Most people don't have anything in the stock market. So how the stock market is doing is not a reflection of what is going on in the real world. But the Federal Reserve, their job, you'll notice during these press conferences, it is Jerome Powell's job to go out there and be as boring as possible. He doesn't want to be excited. He doesn't want to get excited about how great the economy is doing. And he certainly doesn't want to send panic across the economy. So he uses very boring, very leveled words. And this is dumb, because if you're going to be boring, just don't say anything at all. Meet with the members of the Federal Reserve, choose a direction and a speed, and then have it slowly, we'll call it dollar cost averaging interest rates, right? Slowly dollar cost averaging interest rates over time, 0.01% per day in the general direction that you want interest rates to move, with no fanfare, no press conference, nothing to talk about. That's my opinion. Jerome Powell, I don't know what you're doing on YouTube, watching some random real estate investor giving you advice, but I hope you do, because you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. That being said, in general, I think you're making the right moves. Thank you guys for listening to my unpopular opinions on interest rates. Make sure to like and subscribe this video to give the algorithm. I could use a couple more subscribers to give me some feedback on how I'm doing here. Until next time, I'm out.